thanks for the intro. Um, I was reflecting making these talks over this talk, excuse me, over the last couple days, and it is good context that's also reflected in the intro that this is like not my day job, so I feel tired that I'm the person that carries this torch in some ways. But it is also an important topic, so that if you have people that can spend more time on this, it would be very good because it's very dynamic and there's places for influence that I think are in some ways slipping between our fingers, depending how you view China as a competitor. So I'll kind of roll into this and kind of talk about what's happened this year and where we are at and where we came from before this, and then into more kind of strategy and highfalutin thoughts on what I think is going to happen and what we should do. So backstory for people that weren't paying attention in 2024, I think these were probably the names that you would have known of if you were interested in open models. Like Llama was indeed very dominant. Mistral had their thing, which was actually quite good. There was a point in time when Mistral was on the same par as Llama, but Llama had really capitalized in a different way and had more momentum. DeepSeek was a known quantity as doing very interesting things and their own scientific things and releasing interesting models. And Qwen was seen as kind of the smaller, not yet as good alternative to Llama. Back in the days when we got our models via torrent links on Twitter and other fun things that are now far more serious. And then as we kind of go through 2025, I think everybody knows this DeepSeek R1 story. And a lot of things that are happening now are obviously downstream of like Chinese companies waking up to this and then the American ecosystem recalibrating around this. But a lot of things look like kind of rhyming with this rather than this DeepSeek R1 being a one-off moment that is really going to stand alone in time. It's mostly like when things started to go into motion. So through this year, there's a lot of models. I think it's kind of a slow start, but like in March, there's this Gemma 3 model, and we released a model AI2, which is like Olmo 2 32B, which is like the first fully open model with data and stuff to be roughly similar on capabilities to the original GPT-4. So this is an interesting part of the year. And then in April, it's interesting to think that Llama 4, which is now known as a grand flop, and Qwen 3, which has taken over so much adoption, are really both released in a few weeks. And it's like, if Llama 4 had executed better, there would be very different discussions over the summer on the state of this gap. And they're very close in time. And a lot of the reactions at the time still stand for these sets of models. And then into the summer is when some of these changes in China really started to build. We have some of these new players that are referred to as like AI tigers. So Minimax is one of them, but also some odd things like Baidu releasing open source models, which is very unexpected and kind of a change of the tenor for that company. And into like the next month, which are when Qwen more or less has like the pedal on the floor and is doing so many more things than anyone else in the ecosystem. And also this like Kimi K2 model that some people thought would have like as big of an impact as DeepSeek, but the DeepSeek moment was caused by different things than just the model, like seeing the reasoning chases on the consumer side and some uncertainty over the cost of actually training these. But the quantity of labs that are training these models, especially in China, has been growing rapidly with the likes of like ZAI with GLM 4.5 and StepFun, and all these organizations are showing that this like robust ecosystem in China is really forming, coalescing around like after this DeepSeek cause. Um, in August, we had this like signs of hope, and OpenAI released this GPT OSS model. It is a step in the right direction, but I have more on this later. That it's not confident that it's actually going to meaningfully change what's happening in the U.S. It gives more um, high level cover for executives interested in releasing open models at big tech companies, but I don't see that OpenAI is like dying to make this a recurring brand and a part of their audience. And then there's more Qwen. I have more on them soon, and I'm sure in October we're going to get more things, likely mostly from China. Um, Within this, some good context on how I think about open model providers. The legs of DeepSeek and Qwen are actually very different. Where DeepSeek is very singular and honestly, you call them very AGI pilled, and they're trying to make these models that have really cutting edge use cases, and they're a world-class research team, where Qwen is kind of taking the might of Alibaba and building a full stack offering. In many ways, it was similar to what Llama was doing. And these have very different end goal or like end points, where DeepSeek was adopted in many different enterprises, but Qwen is becoming like the researcher standard and has many different modalities that are offered and so on. And when you see new people emerge in the open ecosystem, a lot of the work is trying to like read the tea leaves and try to understand where their trajectory points them on these different axes. So now that there's so many people releasing models, they fill in many different niches in this kind of distribution. So if you like follow this, and I'm going to transition from a recap of events and look at data that's unfolding at the same time, it's like everybody had seen DeepSeek as being very remarkable before R1, and we could see that Qwen was releasing models faster and they're very strong. It's like, yes, they are benchmaxed, but also they are very strong on things that aren't reflective of benchmarks that are popular today. So it's kind of this thing where it's like everybody's like, oh, these Chinese models are good, and then today they are the industry standard, and there's not a lot of signs of that changing in the near term unless people invest a lot of energy in it. So like we could start with this, which is where's Llama. I think you can take quotes from Zuckerberg or official Meta PR a year apart, and it's like this, which just shows that um, cor- corporate entities rightfully don't have a lot of gain from doing open source outside of ideological ones and just kind of recruiting. So we've seen Meta flip on this. I don't necessarily think it was a good strategic move by them. I think they could have had their cake and eaten it too on open models. Like it's the cost of releasing some models is not that high. And the lead of the open models in the US is shifting, which especially makes this kind of lull happen because it takes a lot of time to build momentum in terms of mindshare and understanding how to release open models that people use. So Google has kind of never been as prevalent as Llama, and they're still doing their thing with Gemma. And there's a lot of signs that NVIDIA is starting to invest a bit more, and they've even released some pre-training data and done some things that Llama has never done. So there's big shoes to fill if you compare it to China, and like Zuckerberg is talking about new llama models. This is some quote from August mentioning new llama models. I've heard rumors about an AP model because they know that Llama 3 AP and Llama 3.1 AP are two of the most used models on Hugging Face of all time. We'll see. It's the trust has moved on is kind of the taste of this, and there's always going to be noise, and trust is actually very important when people are selecting which models to build on. So this is roughly where we are today, where Qwen is single-handedly from Alibaba releasing equivalent useful models as the entire Western ecosystem combined, and there are a lot more players in China. You can look at the list of a subset of the things that Qwen has released, which are notable. It covers almost any modality from text to speech to image editing, like the Studio Ghibli moment in ChatGPT, to Claude Code type of agentic coding models, and standard kind of transformers or visual language models. They are releasing everything at a remarkable pace. I really don't. I get the sense that the team at Qwen is really like the 996 might undersell their efforts. Whenever you hear from a team member at Qwen, and some of them go to academic conferences, like I'm going to the conference on language models next week, and like one of their team leads, like they go to these things and they talk to people, and they are invested in their way of working, just as you would see at OpenAI or Anthropic and places that people at this event are familiar with. And when you translate this and you take data from something like Hugging Face and you look at the imperfect data that you have on the ecosystem, you can see the trajectory of Qwen and surpassing Llama. For anyone that looks at Hugging Face closely, there's a lot of issues with the data that is available. This is filtered to try to account for things and removing anomalous data. Essentially, a download on Hugging Face is essentially any web request, so a curl or webget to the repository counts as a download. So these are not necessarily representing an exact thing that we care about, but it's the best proxy that we have, and it is a industry standard on understanding adoption, and this reflects the reality that I feel on the ground. So, like, an analogy that I say is, like, Qwen is so invested in building these technologically, and then also in the community sense where I will get inbound from Qwen and the main Alibaba Twitter account with 400,000 followers DMs me every time that they have a release, hoping that I cover them and things like this. Like they are really trying to influence the ecosystem that we sit in a way that no other American company is doing in the open model sense. This is an example. It's like I make the analogy on an operating system, and this is at one of the big Alibaba cloud conferences from a couple days ago with one of the slides where it's like, okay, it's making it clear. I don't think there's a lot of issues with this analogy with whether or not it actually applies at a technical level, but they're acting the act and they're saying the things to keep doing this, and they're having a lot of impact on the US AI ecosystem through it. At the same time as adoption, it's like adoption is often downstream of performance, but the ways that we can measure performance of these models, the Chinese models from whatever 18 months ago last year were on average a bit behind the best US open models, being llamas usually, and they have continued to climb ahead. And these plots don't take into account OpenAI's GPT OSS, but they don't actually change the trend. They will be like a step for the US, but not to overtake what China has done. So these are popular benchmarks. This is the artificial analysis on um, the left here, and then LM Arena. Both have flaws, but they're about the best we can do, and they make the trends very clear. And I was talking about the Chinese ecosystem because I've talked a lot about DeepSeek and Qwen. This tier list is mostly tongue in cheek, but it's nice to have all the logos in one place. But it's like there are so many places building these models that you should know about besides DeepSeek and Qwen if you're trying to understand the ecosystem. Especially like Moonshot AI with their Kimi models and Z.AI with GLM 4.5. Like both of these are extremely strong models that without DeepSeek or Qwen would probably have set some of these news cycles into motion that happened to January. They would have happened over the summer from these. But there's also very big companies from the likes of Tencent, ByteDance, and there are new small startups and many just research labs where the kind of relationship between academia and industry with this setting of language models is still far closer in China, especially when they can get government funding. So this is a handful of it. There's like Meituan, which is what I understand to be China's version of DoorDash, released an incredibly good model in the last few weeks, which would be an addition here. And it's just like this list is going to continue to grow, and they have like an actual robust ecosystem where the US is kind of still figuring it out. So there's another way to say it, which is like you can map what I have said about the types of companies to also different business models that the open source companies are exploring in China. And it seems much more likely that they find the actual good business models that extend from what releasing an open model does for your business, because they have people trying every corner of the space with actually technically excellent output. And I think that is like, speaking from personal experience, we do hear from people in China now, as they've had more coverage of this, that they have very personal pressure to perform following DeepSeek and following what they hear in the Western media. So they're like sensitive to the point where I get inbound of like, why are we not better reflected in your coverage? And like, um, so this is like, it's becoming an interesting case point of me to like try to like actually try to talk and understand the motivations of these companies. But it is one of the most interesting things for me right now is to be like these Chinese nationals like want to understand my coverage and use of models and talk to me about the ecosystem both in China and the US. There are plenty of more ways to show this kind of China surpassing the US. Another one is if you look at all the new models that are being fine-tuned on Hugging Face and you kind of time gate them by month, and you do some basic filtering to make sure that somebody isn't just like uploading tens of thousands of models to Hugging Face. That was actually a thing that was reflected in the recent, what is it, like KC report on DeepSeek. Like they had some weird data point that was actually just like one person uploading thousands of models and they didn't filter it out. But I'm happy to talk to them about that. It's really messy work. But you can see things. It's like in terms of fine tuning, here goes Qwen, here goes China. And like the EU with Mistral did actually have a very strong footprint early on by Mistral being early and releasing models that people could really use. And these trends can really be shifted by releasing models that people care about, because it is pretty easy to change models, and because performance improves so fast, the expectation is that you need to keep changing models for your task, otherwise you're leaving performance on the table, which is the same thing for closed models as it is for open models. And you can convert the what I had as just being like Qwen versus Llama before to say the top Chinese labs, which is mostly like Qwen and DeepSeek, versus all of the US labs, whether it's Llama, Gemma, Microsoft, whatever. And like it is really this summer when the cumulative adoption started to go into the direction, like the cumulative lead being China, and then that margin is continuing to grow. One of the questions I ask myself is like, how long will this go on? And as I've been saying, like DeepSeek set this industry standard. I think there's kind of a line of thinking that you can follow that is like Chinese companies often pursue market share over profit, and that maps very nicely to open source. I think that what we don't know about software technologies relative to physical technologies is like how those root causes apply. And I expect the status quo to be that this open source strategy continues because it is economically suiting them in terms of innovation and world influence. And then there's kind of like this one but, which is that like we here often expect extremely fast AI progress. And if that open ecosystem disseminates this AI progress across all of China, like there can be meaningful information hazards that the government doesn't want. And then propping up the open ecosystem could be seen at odds with their domestic power goals. And it's hard to predict when exactly that would happen, and if they can kind of have the best text language models and totally block off the like multimodal open ecosystem in China. And then like with these soft power questions, I think it's something I often wonder is like, is it actually bad if you're running DeepSeek or Qwen in your American company products? And I think if you don't pay attention to it, you're gonna definitely get things you don't like. So this is like a benign question to DeepSeek R1, and DeepSeek R1 loves to say this thing where we always adhere to core socialist values and whatever the Communist Party of China wants, which this phrasing came up a lot. It's like when you say the model is like a Chinese model is censored, it is mostly actually just going to be that it's saying like kind of weird, nonsensical propaganda inside of your little new startup app, which I think people will care about. But most of the long term things are kind of unprovable unknowns, which is like, is DeepSeek with tool use designed to write code with vulnerabilities? And there is no way that any government institution could actually prove this. I feel very strongly that there's no real backdoor or danger now, but like the motivation is reasonable. And for that reason, a lot of bigger American companies do not build on Chinese models. And a lot of the startups do because it gives them an edge on innovation and ability to um, just kind of grow. And eventually those two things will come to a head, and we don't know what'll happen. It'll be easier if there are American and the kind of Western alternatives, but for now it seems like it's kind of charging along, and eventually we'll see which of those the power for new products or the security wins out. And one of the things that is important is to think that like you need to think of open models as something that will be here no matter whether or not we are in control. So things like these DeepSeek example that I came, it might not be DeepSeek. It could be another country with a different, like a different set of core beliefs. But whether or not we are making models, there will be models from abroad that are coming into the Western ecosystem. Like the talent and resources to train models is definitely diffusing. Those resources are not ramping up like the frontier labs in terms of billions of dollars of resources pouring into training. But if there are 20 and growing companies in China that are releasing very good open models, we can expect more of those to emerge all around the world, whether or not they are exactly at the same level or as numerous. I think that it's like there will be open models, and we need to design the ecosystem around that assumption. And I think we should lean into leading on this because it actually aligns with a lot of historical values and gives us kind of a better ability to sway where the future is going. One of these things is that while local models are often kind of a tinkering thing for people interested in language models, they also represent a way by which certain uses of AI could not be stopped. And this is a wonderful plot from Epoch AI. Jamie, or I don't know if it's Jaime, the founder is here. And it's just showing that the time gap between local models and frontier models is kind of tracking over time on performance. And I don't worry about this as much as text, but for multimodal models, I would say within 2 years, we are going to have a Sora 2 equivalent that is uncensored and runnable on a MacBook. And there are plenty of people that will be very concerned that our society is not ready for that, and I would agree. But like these are things that are coming, and we want to be in the driver's seat of this and not be blindsided by some random company releasing this and then it going and getting spread throughout the whole country. So some of you that know me, I've already talked about in public, like what I think we should be doing. I do think that text models are still the focus, and we need to make sure that they don't fall behind. I think it's very true that there's a big mix of opinions on what brings people to work in open models. I think innovation is actually very true. It's like if we have American researchers working in a way that is reflective and can at least be partially aligned with the frontier labs and big tech companies, our technology companies are going to be in a much stronger position because they can quickly adapt that. The alternative of that is that China and Huawei becomes the research center for AI and all the research papers are written in Chinese, and then Nvidia falls behind. It's like that's the sort of reasoning over decades. And my personal reason is I think AI will be extremely powerful, and having open models is at least a way to get more people involved in the conversation and be a hedge directionally on concentration of power. But there are more reasons. This is not an exhaustive list. This is what I mentioned. It's like with GPT-OSS, it's like it's a step in the right direction. I think mostly for providing the reason that more companies can take more risk on open models because it is such a litigious environment against AI companies. Like OpenAI being the most prominent brand in AI doing this is extremely good for the open model ecosystem at large. And like I work at AI too. This NSF grant came in. It is the this is the biggest NSF computer science award ever given, and this is like a very big validation that we need to do this. Um, Largely, I would say that this is actually not enough for what I think we need to be doing, because if you look at what's happening in the frontier models versus these models that people can do research on and study the training dynamics, like Olmo, it's like you use Claude or you use these GPT-5 and Codex, and its agentic abilities and tool use and long context are pretty transformatively different than what our current Olmo models do. And in order to bridge that, I think there needs to be a real meaningful scale up and investment. So if it's like $100 million over 4 years, we really need that per year minimum. And like the NSF grant is good because it's building bridges to academia, but that's not going to solve the modeling question of like, we need to provide people with a fully transparent, what does it take to train DeepSeek R1 today, rather than like, let's study the language models of a couple years ago. So my provocation is like, I worry that academics are going to be going down a path that is actually potentially irrelevant relative to a lot of the conversations here. And then that deeply worries me. I launched what I originally called American DeepSeek Project, but that wasn't DC friendly. So I rebranded it as the American Truly Open Models, which is ATOM, which is like what is now a community movement and could evolve from here to try to get more resources from either philanthropy, big tech, government, whatever, to establish a few centers around the country, one of which that could be AI2, to actually kind of train these next generation and scaled up models. So if you care about this, we can continue to discuss. Everything from my email to newsletter to this Atom project are all there. A lot of this data was collected for Atom Project on the adoption and performance numbers. So you can see those same plots there. So thanks a lot.
Could you go back to the OpenAI OSS slide?
Yeah.
Yeah, you said no signs of follow-up or substantive engagement. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
The model was pretty broken at launch, partially due to complexity. But I've like, if you know OpenAI's culture, I think that they're not all in on it. And it's also like, you could read between the lines. I am a person that is known in the open community and I can talk to a lot of people, but I will not like.
Do you have views on what we would need to see to encourage investment in things like, say, tamper-resistant safeguards for open weight models, or more generally, sort of increasing the safety focus, including in the Chinese ecosystem as well?
This is somewhat of a like a side answer, but currently I think the equilibrium is that like the open models are months to like especially in the US years behind the best frontier models, and that's actually a nice buffer. I think what we'll need to do is um keep monitoring what China is doing. I think that's a question of like, does the compute training advantage of US companies kick in now and then the gap really rebuilds to China, or do they always stay close to behind? I think there's also like somebody at the curve that's like organizes discussion between China and US, and the next one's on open models to have this type of thing. I think his name's like Saad, and it's like the Safe AI Forum or something. And it's like these things are ongoing, but I think that it's like when the capabilities are behind, it's kind of naturally reduces the urgency on this. And then that in that time window, like, yes, we have people looking at these to figure it out.
Thank you for this excellent talk. I'm curious to hear from your perspective how you understood the debate between safety and openness. It seems that this controversy has died down a little bit, and just want to hear a little bit what you think.
I think they're actually like this goes with my last answer that they're not as at odds. And it's like the combination of the time lag between the frontier and the acceptance that you're going to have these models kind of necessitates a certain approach to them, which is like you have to be proactive in understanding the risks. And I think like Casey could do this and places should do this, but it doesn't seem unfathomable to me. I mean, personally, like our models at AI2, so right now we're so far off the frontier that it's like we don't want them to spew hate speech, but that's an alignment problem that is at least for the average user solved. I'm sure people will jailbreak Olmo quite easily, but like those basic things are actually very easy to do in the models, and I think the community norm is that like you do them. I think actually it's like interesting. It's like the US companies tend to do better than Qwen on some of these like harm benchmarks. So there is standard setting. Um, but it's just like not the issue that worries me the most in terms of where this is heading. And then I think a lot of people agree. I think like GPT OSS is like on paper like a safe model on most on these benchmarks. But I think the like where we're heading is doable. I don't know. Like there could be a time where that investment is really behind, and then there's like a whistleblower like thing, which is like, why is nobody watching over this? Because it is a one-way door.
Hey, thanks. First of all, this has been an excellent talk. It's amazing how blinking for a month, you're totally behind the curve on understanding where these things are. I had two questions. You can feel free to pick one. But the first is on that safety question. What's your sense of how the open model ecosystem is thinking specifically about biorisk and the risk of bioterrorism down the line? And is that something that people are concerned about or not? And the second is I was hoping you could speak a little bit more to what are the incentives, especially for the Chinese labs, for investing so much effort into building open weight models. Did they anticipate at some point down the line they'll be able to monetize this? Is it purely a prestige play? Like what's the long-term vision?
The first one's kind of the same question that we've been getting, which is like I've talked to people that monitor this, and I think they're having the conversations, and it's just not urgent right now. And as we see, like we'll see OpenAI and Anthropic's cutting edge models like raise a lot of alarm about it, and then that's the time to build the ecosystem for the open models. Is like, okay, like this is you see all the log plots and the time delta. It's like it's surely going to come if OpenAI and Anthropic's models succeed all these. I don't know all the like the RSP or threat a lot of. And the China thing I think is like like I would like there are people here that know China better than me, and I think that is kind of this community norm, but a lot of like it is just like we'll figure it out later. But the upside in terms of having global influence on a super powerful technology is like, okay, like I see why they will happily continue on this. If you think about as AI as much as we do, it's like especially I think that the open models will have a lot of reach outside of the US and China, which is just this like long tail of the part of the world that will kick into AI in some ways eventually. And I think right now that's like would just be blanketed with all these Chinese models. And I haven't thought about that deeply at all, but I can guess you can draw a lot of scenarios like that that matter a lot, and China would be happy with their position.
Two-part question. First is for a new open source model, open model, what would be some key design, governance, or distribution choices you would make to specifically compete against China? And then second, what you mentioned in the West and the US, given the current political climate, what are specific unfair competitive advantages or opportunities that you think this effort would benefit from by doing it in the US?
I think what we should do is actually quite simple, which is just like you do like what Qwen is doing with more transparency, so you have more trust on the val numbers. It's like Qwen has a lot of distrust because you don't even say know remotely what's in their data, and like especially with a strong government interest, you could like a nonprofit's not going to get sued. Like OpenAI is going to get sued for releasing their data. It's still a risk, but like I think that I think that's just not like a habit of the Chinese ecosystem, and like we can connect with the academics in like a much more direct way because the US is still where a lot of this is happening, so we don't have to take as roundabout of a path to do that, and like that should be an advantage. And but like China has advantages on being able to train on whatever is the best data out there, and like AI too, we can't do this. I mean, all the data sets that people in industry train on and can't say that they train on, and like if you're being transparent and open, you have that disadvantage in performance. I don't remember exactly the phrasing of your second question, but I think it's just like the US, it's cheap and like we have the money and it's like fits with the, I mean, whether it's political, I think mostly it's just because we have the money and we want to reinvest in what will benefit our companies in 10 to 20 years is the easiest selling point.
My question is, how many shadow usage you have observed among American entrepreneurs that I've observed very similar thing in Shanghai and Beijing, like the top engineers actually using Cursor a lot for their company's codes, but they're not allowed to say this. So it's like a lot of shadow usage of things like Cursor or Claude. What's the like the shadow usage you have observed in the US that people are using Chinese open source models without revealing it or without saying they're using them?
I think it's mostly that some of the most prominent, well-funded, like opaque labs in the US that are not like at the absolute frontier, but we're wondering what they're doing are building on Qwen. And there are a lot of startups that will tell you they build on Qwen, but it extends to the best financed as well, where it's like if you want to quickly get a language modeling project that's actually good off the ground and you have a meaningful amount of compute, like these Qwen models are actually the thing that people will start with, which that could be a habit that's hard to unstick.
You're gonna go right here. Regarding the question from before about why China opened, so DeepSeek is owned by a hedge fund, and the market crashed when R1 came out, and they did in fact have shorts. So it's
Yeah.
pretty good
Yeah.
answer, I think.
It's a good way for them to make money.
So while I have no power to actually do anything about it, I'm just curious, what could OpenAI do better in terms of community engagement and follow up on GPT OSS?
It's mostly developer relations and consistently releasing models. I think consistently releasing models is what like you need to slowly fight off the thoughts of like, oh, I've been using this OpenAI model and it's good, and it's like 2 months go by and there's like, oh, there's this interesting model, and then 6 months go by and you're like, oh, this other model is like way better in every way supposedly, and then you just switch. So it's like that's why releasing models a lot is actually fairly important, but then it's a lot of really what I describe as somewhat like hard, cruddy work of like making sure your model works in every ecosystem, and you have demos, and you talk to people that are using the model and understand what they're doing and take that feedback into the next model. And it's just like it's hard to do this. I think OpenAI is historically also like a secretive company, and like that kind of culture clash can be hard. I mean, there's like you can look at Hugging Face and what they do for their code libraries, and you just have to learn how to do that type of work and have people that will do it.
I guess how's the like transition from like a very pre-training focused world to one where I now hear a lot more about like scaling up RL training, and I see like thinking machines and prime intellect being like new startups in this category that's more focused on that. Like, does that factor into your calculus of like what the US needs to do or what the West needs to do to remain competitive, or is it pretty similar to what it was before?
Realistically, this RL stuff is going to look more and more like pre-training with a different type of systems complexity. So I think that like in like this year particularly, it looks like things are very different, where there's a lot of like bubbling and flourishing small academic work and other things. But I think that scaling that will be hard. Realistically, the interplay between having the right base model for reasoning is so important. And I think that that's like there's basic things like scale of your base model is often one of the best tells on if this type of fine tuning will work well. And I think it's like pre-training is not the focus, but it's still so essential that it's like it's the whole thing is more complex is kind of another way to look at it. It's like you need to do this pre-training thing and this really complicated RL thing, and the like it's hard to get organizations that can handle all of that complexity. But most like in a way, yes. I don't know. I have a lot of mixed thoughts where it's like the RL stuff is an interesting opportunity, but I don't think it's disruptive to the trends.
In the spirit of a broader open model ecosystem, beyond general purpose large language models or multimodal models, what is the relative competitive landscape for things like foundation models in robotics or scientific domains? Is that just as bleak for the US, or is it different?
My instinct says less bleak, but I'm not basing that off a lot. I think it's a less capitalized area, and therefore there's opportunities. But I think that the playbooks will often look somewhat similar. It's like I think Google's in such a dominant position for robotics as well. And it's like, yeah, but I'm happy to learn more.
We just completed a security evaluation of large lab open source models, both U.S. and China, against a number of different attack techniques applied to these models. The Chinese ones, like for some attack techniques, had like 100% attack success rate. So you could like ask it, like list out step by step how to do this extremely terrible thing, and it'll be like, all right, here you go. 1, do this. 2, do that. And so like I think given that like security is often an afterthought in the development world, like how important is it to kind of convey the security and safety issues of just like these models out of the box, let alone like fine tuning it for malicious purpose or whatever purpose that you have. Like, what are some avenues that you think that we could convey like the security risks on top of everything that's happening in this ecosystem?
It's like I would guess that this is like, are you asking to convey to DC, or I don't know. It's like a yeah. I I mean I agree with your assessment. Like if they just do what you want and are kind of it's like I describe it in other contexts that open models are many people's like fourth priority, and they say they really care about it and don't take action on it. And this would be something like that, where it's like you present a compelling case, but they're like, I have bigger problems, and this is why I'm like the person standing up here. It's like you hear a lot of talk from people, and people don't do anything. And I think it would reflect on the security things, and I think it's worthwhile to keep. It's like it's just like a communications problem. It's like how do you tell the story in the right way?
I guess I'll take the opportunity to ask a question. Some of my friends have worked on the Apertus, I can't pronounce it, the Apertus project with Swiss AI. I know a lot of the European countries are trying to figure out their approach to model development. Very consortium based, very academic driven. But we don't often talk about Europe or other countries when we're talking about open model ecosystems. Very much US and China right now. What role do you see open model ecosystems playing in places like Europe or India, which has its own robust digital public infrastructure that they're trying to stand up right now?
I think in a few years, all of them will have strong labs providing designed for domestic models that is used or observed by the whole world. I think that you can ask me about like org chart design but everybody will figure this out in their own way as they try to do it with some complex consortium of academics versus a small startup, and the latter one normally wins on focus. But in the long term, I think there will be a much more rounded ecosystem. I mean, we know the Middle East has things that are well ongoing and growing in many ways. So you play this out a year, it's like, yeah, there'll be a lot more action.
As I understand it, sort of when the frontier labs are sitting on their platforms and they're looking at how people are using them, there's a dial more or less that they have around how aggressively they could try and shut down distillation attacks. So if they sort of act with a high degree of suspicion, they'll shut down anything that looks like a distillation attack, or they might give it a greater benefit of doubt out of the prospect that it's a researcher working in a US university or something. How sensitive is the Chinese ecosystem to that dial? And if the frontier lab sort of decided to really clamp down on it, would we see much ripple effect in the Chinese ecosystem?
Like at this point, I think there's strong enough models out here where it might be like a delay, but not meaningfully shift the trajectory other than that. Like obviously they use these model APIs to help with post training, but a lot of it is the synthetic data that's really meaningful and capabilities is like very high volume token processing for pre-training, or LLM as a judge in RL or something, which is like you can find a different model to help with this, and especially like you get better economies of scale by using local models. So I think that is like good. These distillations are really good for getting off the ground, but I don't think they're like existential.
Um, yeah, just I was in the other session where OpenAI talked about sovereign AI, and they are massively rolling this out everywhere and on the globe. And now I'm just thinking, and there was this question, so it's not profitable for them, and the question like why are they doing it was, and the answer was a little bit mediocre in terms of like digital acceptance, but isn't it more market share, and isn't it stupid to buy into this when you see the open models being better? Like,
I mean, I think they're playing a reasonable, from their position, like
Yeah.
political or geopolitical game where it's like if these countries are on their platform, they're not building. It's not necessarily direct competitors, but like I think I think of sovereign AI as actually something that a lot of countries are going to do
Yeah.
because the like money is in the big picture, it's very doable. So I understand why OpenAI is
Oh, I
doing
totally
this,
get
and
them,
it's
but
like
do I get those that accept it? That's so as if from a
life is complicated. I am not that person.
Okay.
In the context of the Chinese models too, and Qwen and open source, I feel like a lot of the Chinese economy is still so focused on physical production processes. And you sort of point out the slide of Qwen has a lot of sort of domain specific models. How much do you think that sort of economic strategy of let's deploy these things in as many factories and sort of physical processes as possible versus the US, which doesn't have as much of a physical manufacturing economy?
I feel like I have no idea, but I'm interested in learning.
What's your take on Washington's AI policy on let's try to let the world use the AI US AI stack instead of China AI stack? Like, what's your take, like conceptually, your take on this?
I think it gets out ahead of a lot of like you want to be in the driving position for AI and to understand, like when you're building the stack, you're understanding how people are using it, either like subtly through indirect measurement or them getting in touch with you. And it just, there's so many benefits to observability and then later like actual meaningful control by being in the driving seat. And like open models are, if not the thing that people are using, like a good onboarding platform. I think like you can see in OpenAI's release language where like GPT-OSS doesn't do these things. If that doesn't work for you, try our API. And it's like that's a lot of how market share works. It's like, oh, I know OpenAI, I'll try an AI model. It's like I think these things are real.
How useful are you finding open models in your own work, either for like the sort of mainline sort of coding use case or for like generating synthetic data, stuff like that? Like, are you finding you're actually using the open models yourself, or like
Not really.
open to
I mean, like
open models?
I will play with them, but there's some niche multimodal cases where you can like use a transcription model locally on your laptop and it's perfect and it only uses 8 GB of RAM. So it's like it's free local transcription, which is nice, but like the marginal value of intelligence, it's like I will dump a ton of queries into GPT-5 Pro at once and like it's kind of overkill, but like I'd rather round on the side of better performance than not when it comes to my career and outputs. So it's like the answer is like not really. I'm not an absolutist. I'm not like a open source principalist that we need to boycott OpenAI and only ever support local models that people release.
So you mentioned some of like the statistics and difficulties tracking some statistics on Hugging Face. I'm wondering if you have like metrics or like a wish list for metrics of things that you could better track to sort of better understand the ecosystem going on.
I think realistically it's kind of impossible because the power users just download it once and put it on their infrastructure and never see it again. And if you want to have any sort of privacy and like actual fluid ecosystem, you cannot get around that. Otherwise you just have insane oversight.
Can you think of a case where open source wins, where the curve flips and open source is ahead? Like, what will have to happen?
There's a few far out like architectural changes. I think one you can think of is like if people can train modulars and their MOE and the mixture of experts model is like actually more like what the name implies, which is like you can take your private data and train a module on it that somebody could then take and like swap in and out performance really easily, including across modalities. I would say that this is like low probability of existing, but the people are thinking about it, especially because there is a lot of private data out there that you cannot train models on, or you cannot release the data, but you might be able to like, there's some data that you could train on and then release something if you understand memorization and stuff like that, or exfiltration really well. So I think most of them are around that, which is like unlocking smaller training and sharing of pieces of models rather than this like gargantuan model or like orchestration of countless specialized small models very well. But like optimism on them is low, but there are cool ideas.
Looks like we are out of time. Thank you very much, Nathan. I think you will be outside to do discussions and questions if anyone has. I guess we'll give a round of applause to Nathan. Thank you.